Hi there, welcome back to MacGyver's Workshop, and today we will be working on one of my regular friends' 2003 BMW 325i, and to my viewers I'm going to have to make up for the horrendous oversight in the video that I did last time with the lower radiator hose. Well, my viewers spoke out loud and clearly because I left a lot of detail out, and no excuses, but it was a rush job and it was really poor production there. So I'll make up for it on this one, and it's probably going to be, hopefully it'll be of use to some of y'all, because what we're going to do today is replace what's called, what they just call it an adjusting unit. Basically what it is that it switches between the long and short intake runners on the engine, where when you're at low RPMs you have a longer intake runner for a ram air effect. It gives the engine more torque, and then at higher RPMs, when you're really flogging it, a shorter intake runner works better. So what happens is, these things, when they go bad, they'll either, this flapper valve here, if I can get a good view here on the camera for you folks, this little valve right here will either completely break and fall into the intake, and sadly there's about a 1-inch metal pin right here that if you don't find it, then you must take the engine apart or take the intake off and find that pin, because if you don't find that pin, then that means it's laying around in that intake somewhere and it's going to end up grenading your engine. So thankfully the old one on this one broke internally, so this thing was just flopping around loosely. You'll see that this is kind of spring loaded, and so it didn't suffer the physical damage of falling apart where the plastic gets brittle and, you know, maybe a backfire through the intake cracked it or something. So so she was very lucky. But this happened on my wife's car, on her BMW, the very same thing. So we you know, it's a common failure item, but basically it's got a little tiny hole right there. I don't know if I can get that focused on you for the cameras, but that's where it picks up intake vacuum. And then of course there's an electronic component right there where the harness plugs into it, and the computer just tells it to apply or release vacuum from the spring-loaded diaphragm right here. And if it's closed, you'll have long intake runners, and if it's open, you'll have short intake runners. So anyway, that's it'll give you when these go bad, you get a multitude of issues. You'll get a lot of codes, fuel trim, you know, random misfires on all different cylinders, and it'll run like you've got a humongous vacuum leak, you know, and it won't hardly idle and give you all kind of fits. And in the case of this one, where the spring loaded, you know, action here quit working, and it became disconnected from this, so it just flopped around freely. Sometimes it would run fine, no problem, and then sometimes it would just act up and run like crazy. So the poor woman thought her car was possessed. But anyway, we'll hook the scan tool up to it and look at some of the codes that this thing's got in it, and we'll go from there. And to my viewers who spoke out in earnest, I promise I will try not to miss any details on this one for you. So stay tuned. Alright, so let's get started here. I've already started some preliminary steps, but I will tell you the best process. that I've found that works. Basically what we're after sits right here and has that little flapper valve in there that either opens or closes and makes the engine breathe either through a short or a long intake runner system. So to get at that, of course, you know, they cram everything in here like a you know, an engineering challenge. So best way to get cracking on this is you can do one of two things. You can either go ahead and remove this air duct, but to keep the step simple, and if these little plastic things were to break, you know, they're the little push pin snap locks, and if they were to break, you know, that would ruin your day because they're about impossible to find unless you order them online. So for a weekend project, that's not good. So what I do is I just leave that alone and go ahead and take your 2 bolts out of the air box here. This is one of them. It's a 10 millimeter, and use you a short extension and small little shorty ratchet, and or an air tool, either way is fine. And then what you'll want to do is go ahead and undo your mass airflow sensor here, and you do that by just pressing on that little bail right there and then pulling up. You know, you don't want to be heavy-handed with it because again, especially if it's an older car, the intense heat under these hoods will make this plastic brittle, and again, you don't want to break it. And what I'll do there for the time being is I'll just hook it behind the oil filter there, and then undo your hose clamp here. Okay, and that can be like a 7 millimeter or something like that, or you can use a screwdriver. Either way, depending on which way this clamp is clocked, will determine how you go about getting it off. And then undo the clamps all the way around the box. One here, one here, one here, and let's see, there's another one right back there in that little corner. A little tough to get to see, but it's there. And okay, now this second air boot right here, if you're working on this car and you've not done it before, which in my case on this one I have, but this little rubber, this is a one-piece rubber boot, and then there's kind of like a little elbow or a nipple that's molded in here that comes off. It makes a very sharp bend, and if you run into a problem with the car having basically similar codes as this one, fuel trim, you know, random misfire, just, you know, crappy idle, then you want to take a good look at this particular boot here, because what'll happen is it'll crack in that elbow, and you can kind of reach behind there with your finger and press on it and feel it. And if it feels anything less than like you know, good, strong, safe, solid rubber, then I would replace it, because you will be going after it later. The part's real cheap online. I think I paid like $17 for that one, and it's a royal pain to put in, but you know, depending on which one goes bad first, you know, usually this will go bad first, then this, but it could be either way. In my opinion, you do them both while you're in there, because, you know, you start getting down in there into the intake and the starter and all that, it can be a royal pain, and it's something you really only want to have to do once. So now we've gone over that. Let me change the focus here. Now let's go after this box. Now I've already taken the screws out of it, but I will show you. There are 2 screws that hold this box in. Okay, there's one right there. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. Let me pull the, let's do our wire here. Again, it's one of those little snap clips, so you want to be very gentle with it. Get it out of the way. There's one right here. I think I'll take the camera off, but while it's on the tripod, I'll show you. These are the bolts. If I can get the camera to focus. It's a T40 Torx. You don't want to try and use a Allen wrench or anything like that. This is the socket that fits it, and it has to fit very snugly. That's the most free play. Okay, if there's any more free play than that, then you've probably used a T35, and then you will strip these out, and that's no bueno. So just a good little tip there. Thankfully, I read that on a forum somewhere, so I didn't have to learn from that mistake. Somebody else did, but because those bolts will be very tight in there, and it will, you know, you'll strip it out, and then you'll just have all other kind of headaches to deal with. So let me pop this off here temporarily, and I'll show you where all the screws are that hold it in. There's one that goes right there, and then there's one that's way underneath under here. So once you get that off of there, then I'll put this back on the tripod. Then we can finagle it out. So again, you know, your space is limited, and you want to be very careful because, like I said, you don't know what's happened in here. You don't know if you've got chunks and bits laying in there or what. So you know, you want to start by gently breaking that rubber seal. Okay, now this is coming out already because I've already had it out and I put it back in here to show you, but it's you know, it's a you know, they're usually stuck in there, but you want to just be very careful and don't put too much meat on it because you don't want to break anything, and you don't want it laying around down there inside the intake. And what you'll have to do is move those two vacuum lines down and press them down out of your way. Okay, and then you just kind of have to gently finagle it out of there. Now you'll see that the butterfly is completely gone on this, and that's because I told you I've already had this out and done you know, done some work on it. So let me show you this pin if I still have it. I may have disposed of it already. Yep, I did. Sorry, but it's a little metal collar or whatever you want to call it, and it has a pin in it that acts as the hinge. For the flap in there. And thankfully, this one, this pin and all was okay. And what had happened is the flap somehow got stripped off. You know, it just has a hexagonal shape, and it sits down and snaps down on top of this lever here, and everything internally to this is functioning. It's just that it's stripped out of the flap. So the flapper valve was just sitting there and flapping back and forth, not doing anything, no matter what it was being commanded to do. So anyway, and then of course it helps to you know, if there is anything missing off of this, you must find it. And if you don't find it, then it's time for the intake manifold to come off. So thankfully that's not the case here. We've accounted for every bit and piece, so we're good. So now let's put our let's install our new one. Okay, now to install our new one, we will just you'll see how it has this silicone gasket material all around it. And they advise not to lubricate it because there's enough oil mist in the intake itself to act as a lubricant. But once we've ensured that everything's clean in here and there's no spooge or debris or anything in there, like from the oil breather crankcase ventilation system, that's a whole nother video altogether. I've already done it on the wife's car, but that's a whole nother challenge. But anyway, so what we want to do, we want to again push these two vacuum lines out of the way and very gently finagle our valve in here, and it fits into a groove, and then just very gently work our way in there, and then it's not going to pop in or skadunk or anything like that, so because it has to compress against that rubber seal. So now what we're going to do is we'll draw it up nice and even. Remember I told you about a short extension and a little flexi ratchet? That's the best tool in the world for this job. But for right now, we'll just do it just by hand. That's why I love these extensions with the knurling on them, so you can get in there and you can do this. I think that's like a, what is this? Yeah, GM. That's a little cheap set that I got from the auto parts store. You get your little Bozo Bucks coupons for like $5 or $10 back from them, and I think I bought this set of extensions. So anyway, so what we want to do is we want to get our bolts started in here. And again, you want to be very careful. And if you think you're clumsy, go ahead and plug this intake boot here, so if you were to drop it, it doesn't fall down in there. Then give it a couple of turns with your dexterous fingers there to get it started. And start threading it in there. Don't tighten it. Definitely, you never tighten one of them all the way. You just pull it up until you start feeling resistance. And what I was telling you about putting the rag in that boot is exceptionally important for this bottom one here, because this one's a little tricky to get going in there. Requires a deft amount of attention, paying attention to what you're doing, so that that's starting by hand, so I don't have to worry about it falling out of there. Okay. Right up till it's snug, and we'll just go back and forth between them and just very gently draw it up by hand. Because, like I said, we want to make sure it pulls up nice and even. And once you feel it bottom and get to where it's tight,
Then you take your ratchet, and it really only needs just the slightest torque. You don't want, this is not something you want to, do tighter than hell and then some. What you have basically is a brass bushing molded into plastic, and you just don't want to go there, trust me. So now with that done, that basically completes the installation of that, short of hooking the wire back up. And now at this point, all we have to do, is we'll hook this up. I don't snap them on. I go ahead and press these and push them on. It just feels safer to me that way. I wouldn't want to crack one of those plastic things. So and then we'll have to put our boot in there and tighten our clamps up, but you don't want to tighten it all the way because you don't know exactly where this boot's going to need to clock to run into that. So let's take a break here for a second, and we'll come back to it.